we tried to bring our experience to the meeting, and really we raised four things. One is that there's a lot of pain out there in the area of social rights that is causing, great pressure on all of our institutions. And if you want to narrow it down to one thing, it's specifically around the affordability of housing and people's wages not being able to afford their housing. So communities are being disrupted, people are forced to leave where previously integrated urban areas and go kilometers outside. And meanwhile, urban space is becoming increasingly off limits or stratified and increasingly divided between those who can afford and those who cannot. Although some of the policy developments are negative generally and affect everyone, in fact also there are very clear racially discriminatory aspects to many of the policies we see in many of the European countries. And that needs to be recognized, acknowledged, and challenged. In particular, there's a very strong anti-Romani element to many of the things we see coming across now. The UN system is increasingly examining what's called financialization, in which large flows of capital come into an urban area, park money, and displace communities. And frequently these are people who, these are entities, big companies, that don't intend to live or work in those urban spaces, but are displacing communities from it. Vulture funds, predatory capital, and the answer to those things is that where we see positive developments, it's cities and countries regulating to protect people and communities from this very disruptive flow of capital. It's the difference between seeing property as a commodity and housing as a human right. Around Europe we see many very positive practices in simply protecting communities. So it's not a question of choosing between economic systems, but of just leaving intact protections for people. We also have seen very positive policy developments recently on tackling homelessness. So many of the messages that we hear coming from community level are simplify, put people in adequate housing with support, and we can tackle these housing problems that are in front of our noses through good policy and good regulation. The name, the right to adequate housing, the right to adequate housing means that people have a right which they can, a legitimate expectation of their government to create an urban and rural space in which they can have access to a home that is habitable, affordable, culturally relevant, secure. Those things are not out of reach because they exist in many places, and for those people who currently experience insecurity, many of them have experienced security in the past. So our view is that there is a right, and there are good policy models for making that right viable for people that are at hand, that can be drawn on and used. The possibility to regulate to ensure that people are protected from arbitrary expulsion from their own housing. So that's legal protection against forced eviction, legal protection for security of tenure. There's also good policy models. For example, Finland has ended homelessness. How did Finland end homelessness? Finland simply said that all of this discussion about how complicated it would be to put homeless people in housing was wrong. The simple matter of fact was people who lacked a home, in order to integrate into society, needed to be provided with housing and with the support to live in it. And they brought their homeless population from 10,000 or more to 0. So in diverse areas of regulation, there's work to be done that is not complicated work, that protects people from the rigors of other forces, that provides, as you've said, that can support diversity and diverse urban spaces, diverse rural spaces, that bring people who are in extremely excluded circumstances into society so that they can make a genuine contribution to their societies. Those are all not far away. They're doable. This is a room of people in common cause, working at national level and also the multinational, international and European bodies. I think the challenge for us is the question of relevance. There is a sense of frustration out there that governance has not responded to the pain that people are genuinely in. And so a lot of what we were discussing was not the what of the subject, which I think many people in the room are facing similar challenges, difficult national contexts, difficult political discourses, but how important it is that we move forward and help our institutions deliver for people. I think governments understand and desire to respond to the needs of people. That's fairly clear. But governments come under diverse pressures, and our human rights framework, the human rights framework that's available, is in a sense a legal check against the kinds of pressures that governments can come under that are destructive either of people or of the long-term interests of society. We need to respond to these questions now. I think that's clear. We need to provide answers to communities that feel under stress. And whether, there certainly have been many interesting positive developments. I mentioned Finland. There are also real problems that have come up: aging housing stocks, erosions of legal orders. So, we are in a situation in which, in effect, as always, we need to respond to the problems that are in front of us. The urgency of now is that there are people out there who are hurting. That is, the human rights order is for people, and as long as there are people who are homeless, people who are threatened with eviction from where they live, people who live in segregated neighborhoods excluded from areas, people who are forced to move vast distances or even countries in order to gain access to a viable means of making a living, those are problems that we need to respond to. I hope that in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the commitment of the world to really move forward on a whole vast portfolio of things by 2030, it's called the 2030 Agenda, that we will infuse the thinking with human rights dimensions, including on the subject of this meeting, which is housing, and that we will really tackle the problems that are in front of us for the good of all people and all of our societies. The main message I think that we brought to this meeting was these are doable things. They're not impossibilities. So I hope that the room leaves, and I think the room will leave, with a commitment to go back home to country and to work further to achieve the SDGs.